After finding a solution to the first problem, I then decided to tackle the second problem, which is ineffective learning. Remember, this refers to when students make the same errors again and again, even after being given corrective feedback. So because of that, I decided to write a paper entitled The Effects of Indirect Coded Corrective Feedback. So this is a subtype of corrective feedback, with and without short, effective teacher comments on L2 writing performance, learner uptake, and motivation. This was written in conjunction with Dr. Liu. So the major question of this research paper was to find out whether corrective feedback with effective comments made the difference in helping students improve their writing performance. Again, it's about comparing corrective feedback with effective comments and corrective feedback without effective comments. The major findings were as follows. Number one, with or without comments, the students improved with ICCF, with indirect coded corrective feedback. This meant that corrective feedback was useful in helping students improve their writing. Now, this is the interesting part. In cases where corrective feedback was given in conjunction with short effective comments, the students made significant improvements in their writing performance by the time they wrote their second writing task. In cases where students received corrective feedback without comments, the improvement was not observed until they started their third writing task. So this meant that the addition of short effective comments helped speed up the process of improvement. So after writing this paper, how did I change my class? Well, again, let's have a review. Corrective feedback, it was still found to be useful. However, if corrective feedback is given with short effective comments, then it becomes even more useful because it speeds up the process of this improvement. So in order to help these students, I decided to incorporate short effective comments every time I gave them corrective feedback. I also asked the students to encourage each other. Encouragement doesn't just come from the teacher. Encouragement can come from their peers. And so I asked them to take part in activities that involved peer feedback. In addition to encouraging each other, I also asked them to encourage people outside their classroom. This year is the year of COVID-19, and a lot of frontliners are disheartened and discouraged because of lack of support. In order to combat that, I asked the students to write letters to these frontliners, and this is an example of what my student wrote. Thank you for all your hard work and devotion. So to conclude this part, remember, corrective feedback with short effective comments helps students because it prevents them from making these errors. After having found solutions to these two problems, we now tackle the third problem, inefficient learning. And this is basically finding ways to help students in Taiwan become more efficient or faster learners so that they don't have to spend as much time learning English. To this end, I wrote a paper entitled Construction and Proposal of an Academic Word List for Medical Professionals at Different Developmental Stages. So this was written for my corpus linguistics class. And the main question was to ask, how do we create a word list for all medical professionals? So basically we wanted to create different word lists for different medical professionals at different developmental stages. If it's still unclear, let's look at the results and then you will find out what I mean by that. So we were able to create 5 different word lists. The first word list had high school students preparing to enter medical school as target users. The second word list was for university students who are already enrolled in medical school. So obviously, if we compare the first two word lists, the first one's much easier than the second one. The third word list is for medical researchers doing work in the medical field. So this word list contains a lot of academic words. The fourth word list is for professionals in general medical fields. And finally, the fifth word list is for medical professionals working in a specialized or a specific discipline. So what does this have to do with inefficient learning? By creating these word lists, we realized, number one, that word lists and spelling lists are important. It is important that we explicitly teach vocabulary, that we explicitly teach words. And one way to do that is by giving the students word lists or spelling lists. However, we also found out that incidental learning is important. We don't really have to teach explicitly all the time. And one way to foster incidental learning is to create a linguistic landscape or an environment that is conducive for learning English in the classroom. And this picture shows what I did after writing that paper. I decided to decorate the walls of my classroom with the works of my students. However, linguistic landscape should not just be limited to the classroom. We also need to think outside the box. And so for one of the compositions that I asked my students to write, I asked them to write the compositions in a circular cutout. After they wrote their compositions, they gave their compositions to me, I laminated the composition, and I gave it back to them. After that, they were able to use this laminated composition as coasters at home.